In the early 1970s, as Motown's golden era faded and the auto industry began to crumble, a different kind of power rose in Detroit. In the shadow of factories and jazz clubs, a crew of men known only as the Black Mafia, BM for short, quietly took control of the city's most lucrative business, heroin. Unlike street corner hustlers, the Black Mafia operated with a sophistication that Detroit had never seen, moving product and money with the precision of a Fortune 500 company and the violence of a criminal army. BM's origins traced back to the city's turbulent late 60s, when race riots and economic decline left entire neighborhoods hungry for opportunity. Into that void stepped men with vision and no fear. They formed tight circles, trusted only blood and childhood bonds, and swore silence. Their suits were sharp, their cars clean, and their rules were simple. Loyalty above all, betrayal answered with blood. The Black Mafia ran their heroin trade from hidden back rooms, neighborhood bars, and upscale lounges that doubled as business fronts. Leaders like Harold Harry O. Stokes and Big Man, figures shrouded in rumor, built a network that reached into the police, city hall, and even local celebrities. They laundered money through legitimate businesses and paid off officials to keep the heat down. BM didn't shout, they moved in whispers, controlling their empire with fear and ruthless efficiency. But for nearly a decade, BM was untouchable. They defined the city's underworld, making fortunes off heroin while families across Detroit lost sons and daughters to the needle. And as the 1970s wore on, their empire only grew, setting the stage for a series of betrayals, murders, and investigations that would test their code and shake the city to its core. The Black Mafia's empire thrived in the shadows of Detroit, built on a web of loyalty, intimidation, and ruthless organization. At the top were men who treated the drug trade like big business, Harold Harry O. Stokes, Eddie the Fat Man Jackson, and others who kept their hands clean but never hesitated to order violence when the situation called for it. Their network stretched from the poorest corners of the city to the clubs where Motown stars spent their nights. BM's heroin pipeline flowed from New York, through Chicago, and straight into Detroit's streets. They kept a tight grip on supply, selling pure product to trusted lieutenants who in turn supplied a small army of street dealers. Cut too many corners, skim from the top, or disrespect the chain of command, and you didn't last long. Dealers who worked for BM followed a strict set of rules: media group of men listening to instructions in Detroit apartment, men shaking hands in secretive meeting, serious discussion among men in dimly lit room at it stock at it distribute _ equally, no freelancing, no snitching, no crossing the family. And all the while, heroin's grip on Detroit was tightening. Addiction rates soared, families were torn apart, and the city's morgues filled with the casualties of BM's success. The Black Mafia's rise had changed the rules of Detroit's streets, but as their influence grew, so did the enemies, both outside and within, setting the stage for a storm that no one would be able to control. By the mid-1970s, the Black Mafia's grip on Detroit seemed absolute. Their operations ran with military precision, stash houses stocked with heroin, trusted runners delivering money, and a network of lookouts watching every move on the block. BM members dressed in tailored suits, drove Cadillacs with tinted windows, and blended easily with the city's elite. On the surface, they were businessmen. Behind closed doors, they ruled with fear. But beneath this facade of control, trouble was brewing. The heroin epidemic they fueled was ravaging Detroit's neighborhoods, sparking desperation and violence that threatened even their own people. Small-time dealers and upstart crews, inspired by the Black Mafia's wealth, began breaking away, forming new alliances and testing the old guard's power. Ambition turned to jealousy, and whispers of betrayal crept through the organization. Detroit, once BM's playground, became a battleground. For every rule they enforced, another was broken in the shadows. The city was changing, and the Black Mafia could feel it, the balance of power shifting, loyalty slipping, and the promise of easy money growing more dangerous with every deal. As the decade drew to a close, the Black Mafia's house of cards began to tremble. Law enforcement, emboldened by new leads and embittered families, made the syndicate their top priority. The FBI launched Operation Brown Sugar, deploying undercover agents and wiretaps in an all-out effort to infiltrate BM's secretive inner circle. Front businesses were raided, and safe houses were watched day and night. Once, BM's payoffs and muscle had kept the law at bay. Now, detectives were everywhere, searching for the crack that would bring the whole operation down. Inside the organization, distrust ran rampant. The violence that had protected the Black Mafia for years now threatened to tear it apart. Paranoia took hold as longtime associates were found dead under suspicious circumstances, their murders unsolved but clearly meant as warnings. BM's leadership responded with brutal force. Suspected snitches disappeared and dealers who failed to deliver cash faced deadly consequences. But the more bodies that dropped, the more attention they drew from the police and the press. Younger members, no longer loyal to the original code, began cutting side deals or secretly cooperating with law enforcement in exchange for protection. Rival outfits seized the opportunity to reclaim lost territory, triggering a new wave of street violence. Shootings, once rare in BM territory, became nightly news. The city's sense of fear and exhaustion deepened. Even the families BM once protected started to question whether the cost of their order was worth it. Operation Brown Sugar finally paid off when a trusted lieutenant, facing a long prison sentence, agreed to turn state's witness. With his testimony, federal prosecutors had the blueprint they needed. Arrests followed in rapid succession, courtrooms filled with lawyers, lawmen, and former friends now testifying against each other, while Detroiters watched the fall of an empire that had ruled their streets from the shadows. The collapse was messy, public, and final. The Black Mafia's reign was over. But as the city braced for the next wave of hustlers ready to seize the power vacuum, Detroit was left with a new understanding. Crime at this scale could never be erased, only replaced, and the cycle would begin again. The downfall of Detroit's Black Mafia was headline news, but its ripple effects spread far beyond the courtroom. As federal agents paraded BM leaders in handcuffs and prosecutors recounted stories of murder, bribery, and heroin empires, Detroiters looked back in awe and anger at just how deep the syndicate's influence had reached. The trials revealed secrets that shocked the city. Testimony detailed how BM's leadership bought police protection, laundered millions through car dealerships and nightclubs, and ordered hits on rivals and suspected snitches with chilling efficiency. Former allies became government witnesses, describing in open court the coded messages, safe houses, and payoffs that had kept the organization afloat for nearly a decade. Long-standing loyalties crumbled under the threat of life sentences. Inside the courtroom, the mood was electric. Defendants once feared on the street, now powerless as prosecutors played tapes and read off ledgers documenting cash, heroin shipments, and body counts. Some family members sat in the gallery, grieving the addiction and violence that had torn their neighborhoods apart. Others watched in disbelief as men who once wore the finest suits in Detroit were sentenced to decades in prison. With BM's leaders convicted and their network dismantled, law enforcement celebrated a major victory. Yet on the streets, the end of the Black Mafia was bittersweet. The syndicate's collapse left a vacuum, one quickly filled by a new generation of gangs and hustlers, eager to claim the corners and cash BM had left behind. The violence did not stop, it simply changed shape. Families still struggled, and the heroin that fueled BM's rise continued to destroy lives. The story of Detroit's Black Mafia faded from headlines, but its lessons lingered. For years, older Detroiters would speak of the days when the family ran the streets with a code, harsh, but at least predictable. In the aftermath, order vanished, and chaos moved in, leaving Detroit to reckon with a new era of crime and an old, lingering question. Was it ever really about protection, or just power and profit from the start? In the years following the fall of the Black Mafia, Detroit was a city changed, but not healed. The removal of BM's leadership brought headlines and a sense of relief to some, but for many, the real impact was a deeper chaos that filled the void. Without the old order, new crews, less disciplined, more violent, sprang up almost overnight. The drug trade shifted from shadowy back rooms to open warfare on the corners, and neighborhoods that had once feared BM's muscle now braced for a new generation of unpredictable violence. Former associates of the Black Mafia tried to move on, some disappearing into the quiet corners of Detroit, others hustling to stay relevant in a world that no longer had room for the old codes. Families who had once relied on BM's protection faced the reality that the syndicate's sense of order was an illusion. There were no more rules, only survival. Law enforcement, emboldened by their victory, ramped up efforts across the city, targeting the new wave of gangs and dealers. But the lessons of the Black Mafia era lingered. Police crackdowns alone could not stop the demand for drugs or heal the wounds left by years of addiction and violence. Many of the same social and economic problems that gave rise to BM persisted, and Detroit's struggle continued, now with even more uncertainty. For years, stories of the Black Mafia echoed through barbershops, churches, and family gatherings, a legend of men who built and lost an empire on the streets. Their downfall became a cautionary tale, whispered as both warning and nostalgia. In the end, the Black Mafia's legacy was not just in the millions they made or the bodies they left behind, but in the city they changed forever, a city still searching for peace, still haunted by the shadows of its own making.